In the mountains of western Virginia, where fog dances between ancient pines and time seems to have stopped in 1920, there exists a place that America chose to forget. Odd, a small rural community in the Appalachians, has become synonymous with what modern society considers an absolute taboo: generations of marriages between direct relatives. The dirt road leading to the Whittaker family property is narrow and uneven, flanked by rusty trailers and wooden houses that defy the laws of gravity. GPS stops functioning kilometers before you arrive. It is as if technology itself refuses to acknowledge this place's existence. In 2020, photographer and documentary filmmaker Mark Leiter ventured into these mountains with a camera and a question haunting his mind: how can an entire family survive decades of consanguineous marriages? What he discovered was a reality that challenges any fiction. The Whittaker family is not merely an isolated case of consanguinity. They represent the extreme outcome of generations of geographical isolation, absolute poverty, and traditions perpetuated for over a century. Ray, Lorraine, Timmy, and Freddie Whittaker are siblings who carry in their bodies and minds the physical and mental marks of a genetic lineage turned inward upon itself. Ray, the eldest, has severe physical malformations. His head is disproportionately small relative to his body, a condition known as microcephaly. He communicates only through grunts and gestures, his intellectual capacity severely compromised. Lorraine, the only sister, has obvious facial deformities and motor difficulties that prevent normal movement. Timmy, though able to speak a few words, has a severe intellectual disability. His face bears the unmistakable signs of consanguinity, facial asymmetry, serious dental problems, and an empty gaze revealing decades of social isolation. Freddie, the youngest, is the only one capable of basic conversation, yet even he shows clear signs of cognitive impairment. What is most shocking is not merely the visible deformities, but the naturalness with which this family accepts their condition. For them, this is the only reality they have ever known. There are no mirrors in the house. No television shows them other families. No references from the outside world allow them to understand how profoundly different they are. The house they inhabit is a collection of rooms without electric light, running water, or any modern comfort. The smell of mold and neglect permeates every corner. Piles of trash accumulated over years form mountains of debris in the backyard. It is impossible to distinguish where the garbage ends and their personal belongings begin. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because this is one of the most extreme and well-documented stories of consanguinity ever recorded in the United States, and you won't find details like these anywhere else. To understand how the Whittaker family reached this point, we must return to the 19th century, when the first settlers made their homes in the isolated mountains of western Virginia. The Appalachian region has always been defined by extreme geographical isolation. Entire communities formed in deep valleys separated by insurmountable mountains and kilometers of dense forest. The geography is brutal and merciless. Mountains rising abruptly over 1,200 meters high create narrow, isolated valleys where small communities develop their own cultures, languages, and traditions over generations. During winter, snowfall can completely cut off these communities for months, forcing families to depend solely on themselves. Dr. Spencer Wells, a geneticist specializing in isolated populations, explains that when small groups remain geographically isolated for generations, the genetic pool becomes progressively limited. What occurred in the Appalachians is a classic example of genetic drift in small founding populations, Wells states in his research published in the Journal of Medical Genetics in 2018. He further elaborates on the concept of a population bottleneck. When a population is dramatically reduced and remains isolated, it loses available genetic diversity, creating a vicious cycle that leads to obligatory consanguinity. The documented history of the Appalachians is filled with similar examples. During the colonial era, entire families migrated to remote valleys seeking autonomy and isolation from the federal government. Many brought with them ancient European traditions, including marriage practices already considered problematic at the time. The Whittaker family's roots in the region are documented since 1887, when John Whittaker settled in Odd with his wife Sarah. U.S. Census records show that in the second generation, marriages began occurring between first-degree cousins. By the third generation, marriages between siblings and half-siblings had become common, not by choice, but due to an absolute lack of options. Archives of the local Methodist Church, preserved in Charleston's historical library, reveal disturbing details about how these unions were formally recognized by religion. Reverend Samuel Morrison, who served the community from 1920 to 1945, kept meticulous records of baptisms, weddings, and funerals. His personal diaries, discovered in 2019, contain passages describing his growing concern over the irregular unions he was forced to bless. In an entry dated June 23, 1934, Morrison writes, "Today I performed the wedding of Mary Whittaker to her own brother, Henry. The girl is only 16 and already shows visible signs of mental disability. Henry is not much better. Both are children of a union between father and daughter. God bless." Entries like this continue for years, documenting progressively more problematic marriages. Morrison recorded at least 12 unions between first-degree relatives in the Whittaker family between 1930 and 1940. Each entry reveals his growing anguish, but also his powerlessness in the face of a tradition that continued regardless of his approval. Isolation was not only geographical, it was also cultural, religious, and economic. The Whittaker family belonged to a fundamentalist religious sect that viewed the outside world as sinful and corrupt. Marrying outside the family was not only impractical geographically, it was considered a betrayal of family and religious values. This sect, known locally as the Church of the Elect, developed a peculiar theology that justified and even encouraged consanguineous marriages. Doctrinal documents found on the Whittaker property include handwritten sermons interpreting biblical passages as divine commands to maintain the purity of the family's lineage. The genetic consequences began to emerge in the fourth generation. Medical records from Charleston General Hospital, obtained through public information requests, show that between 1920 and 1950, at least 15 Whittaker children were born with severe disabilities. 8 died before the age of 5. Prolonged consanguinity results in what geneticists call inbreeding depression. Deleterious recessive genes, which typically remain inactive when a person marries someone genetically distant, become dominant when both parents carry the same genetic mutations. In the case of the Whittakers, genetic analyses performed by Dr. Michael Bamshad of the University of Washington revealed that the current siblings have a coefficient of consanguinity of 0.355, meaning they are genetically closer than would be possible even among normal siblings born to the same parents. This indicates their own parents were the products of multiple consanguineous relationships. To put this number in perspective, Dr. Bamshad explains, a coefficient of consanguinity of 0.375 is extraordinarily high. For comparison, the children of siblings would have a coefficient of 0.25. What we see in the Whittakers suggests at least 3 consecutive generations of unions between very close relatives. This level of consanguinity results in what geneticists term extreme homozygosity, a condition where nearly all deleterious recessive genes are expressed simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a medical genetics expert at Johns Hopkins who studied the Whittaker case, describes the situation as a perfect example of the worst possible scenarios in human genetics. Martinez continues, "What we see in the Whittakers is essentially the human equivalent of a highly inbred laboratory lineage. They have accumulated so many deleterious mutations that it is a miracle they survived to adulthood. Their immune systems, neurological development, bone structure, and cardiac function are all compromised by this extreme genetic burden." Detailed genetic testing revealed the Whittaker siblings carry at least 23 different recessive mutations in a homozygous state, all expressed simultaneously. In a normal population, the probability of a person carrying even 5 of these expressed mutations is astronomically low. The Whittakers represent a statistically impossible convergence of adverse genetic factors. The physical malformations are only the tip of the iceberg. Congenital heart problems, partial deafness, chronic kidney issues, and an extremely compromised immune system are part of the siblings' daily reality. Ray suffers from severe epilepsy, with seizures that can last for hours. Lorraine has respiratory problems that cause her to constantly gasp as if out of air. The most disturbing aspect is that these siblings are the survivors. Local church documents indicate at least 7 other siblings were stillborn or died in childhood due to life-incompatible malformations. The 4 who survived are paradoxically the least severe cases of a genetic lineage that should have died out decades ago. The perpetuation of consanguinity in the Whittaker family cannot be understood as mere individual choice. It is the result of a complex system of isolation, poverty, and ignorance that has been self-perpetuating for over a century. Betty Whittaker, a distant cousin who managed to leave the community in the 1970s, offers a startling account of internal family dynamics. No one explained anything to anyone, she told documentary filmmaker Mark Leiter. Girls got pregnant by their own brothers, fathers, or uncles, and that was seen as normal. There was no sex education. No knowledge about genetics. No alternatives. Betty, now 73 and living in a nursing home in Charleston, carries her own physical and emotional scars from life on the Whittaker property. She has minor finger deformities and slight facial asymmetry, signs that she, too, is a product of consanguinity, though to a far lesser degree than her cousins. I was considered the normal one in the family, Betty recalls bitterly. Because I could read a few words and do simple sums, it gave me enough courage to escape when I was 19. I walked 15 kilometers down the mountain until I reached the main road, where a truck driver gave me a ride to Charleston. Betty describes disturbing family rituals that show how consanguinity was institutionalized within the family. There was a ceremony they called the Blessing of Purity, held when a girl turned 14. The family patriarch, in my time, old Thomas Whittaker, would choose which male relative would be that girl's guardian. It didn't matter if it was her father, brother, uncle, or cousin. The girl had no choice. These guardians held exclusive reproductive rights over the women assigned to them. Betty says resisting this designation resulted in severe punishment, isolation in a dark basement, food deprivation, and, in extreme cases, beatings that left permanent marks. My younger sister Rebecca tried to escape 3 times, Betty remembers, her eyes filling with tears. The 3rd time, they broke her legs with a hammer to ensure she could never walk far enough to escape. She died at 23, giving birth to her 5th child. All 5 babies were from our own father. Betty describes an environment where incest was not only tolerated but encouraged by family patriarchs as a way to maintain lineage purity and ensure family properties weren't divided among outsiders. Old John always said that Whittaker blood was pure blood and that mixing with others was a sin. Raleigh County Social Services records, obtained through public information requests, reveal that between 1960 and 2000, at least 23 Whittaker children were registered with the same father listed on the birth certificates of mothers who were their own daughters or sisters. The legal system simply ignored these irregularities, treating the family as a lost cause. If you, too, feel the weight of this story, comment now: how does a society allow this to happen for so many generations? Formal education never existed for the current Whittakers. Ray, Lorraine, Timmy, and Freddie never attended school. They cannot read, write, or perform basic arithmetic. Their only knowledge of the world comes from conversations with equally isolated and ignorant relatives. For them, their condition is normal because it is the only reality they know. Most tragically, the cycle continues. Freddie, despite his cognitive limitations, has had at least 2 relationships with first-degree cousins. One resulted in the birth of a child who died at 3 months due to severe heart malformations. The second ended in a miscarriage during the 5th month of gestation. Dr. Robin Bennett, a genetic counselor at the University of Washington, explains, when the coefficient of consanguinity reaches levels like those observed in the Whittaker family, the likelihood of severe birth defects exceeds 50%. It is statistically more likely that a child will be born with severe problems than born healthy. The family survives solely on government benefits, approximately $800 monthly for disabilities, which barely cover basic needs. They depend on neighbors' charity for food and clothing. Once a month, a van from the local church brings basic groceries, canned beans, rice, old bread, and milk. The nearest health clinic is 45 kilometers away, and the Whittakers have no means of transportation. They have no forms